Welcome back, my friends. This video is going to be about the role of the pineal gland in Kundalini Yoga. So I'd like to begin by talking about the known role thus far of the pineal gland in the human body. So the pineal gland is a very tiny organ. Generally, they say it's about the size of a grain of rice, and it is buried in the skull, right back behind here in the middle of the skull. And it performs a very important function, even though it's so tiny. So as soon as we wake up in the morning, when the light hits your eye, your human eye, immediately it sends signals to the pineal gland to begin to create serotonin. That serotonin gives you energy and motivates you to reach and to start your day. The same thing happens when the light begins to dim. As the light begins to dim and the sun begins to go down, the signals start again from the eye, go into the pineal gland, and the pineal gland then begins to secrete melatonin, which makes you sleepy and puts you to sleep. So this tiny little gland has an extremely important role in our lives. The circadian rhythm dictates our energy levels and how much sleep we get. Without that, where would we be? We wouldn't get very far. So it's a pretty amazing little gland. Now, its role in Kundalini Yoga, it goes way back, and usually we talk about this center. Yogis talk about it as the Ajna center, and it typically is, the symbol of it is actually right behind us, right here, the Om symbol. So what happens in Kundalini Yoga, the whole objective is to move through spinal postures, through chanting, through breath work, through muscle contraction. We move the spinal fluid, which encases the pineal gland. So if you can imagine, right, the spine going up to the brain, and the brain also has spinal fluid in it. And you have the pineal gland just sort of like the way a baby is in amniotic fluid in the belly, same thing. And these waves now we all have waves of spinal fluid that automatically go up our spine. But what we do is we try to accelerate it so it happens quicker, it happens faster by these movements, by the breathing, which then causes these waves of fluid to hit the pineal gland and put pressure on it. So the hypothesis that yogis created centuries ago is that when this pineal gland is stimulated, the person will have an awakening of sorts. Their awareness will change. Let's just say that. And there's a whole host of things that happens as a result. So when these yogis who had this hypothesis, they then began to test it out through many years of yoga practice, trial and error, and writing things down. So the evidence at this point is mostly anecdotal. Thousands of years of yogis trying it out, and nowadays us trying it out. to then create a theory around this. Now that theory is being supported by studies, which I just looked at a few before starting this video. If you Google whether or not the pineal gland secretes DMT, which is what we're going to be getting to in this video, because this is the whole point of Kundalini Yoga, that when it does that, when it secretes, which these articles, these not articles, but these scientific studies, peer-reviewed in peer-reviewed journals, talk about how this pineal gland does release a tiny bit of DMT. Now, DMT is also found in the body, but the pineal gland also contains it. And the whole point is to get it to release. When it releases, the awareness of a person changes, which we're going to get into. But let's go back to this movement now of spinal fluid that hits the pineal gland, right? So when these waves begin to hit the pineal gland, it creates a pressure on it. And we call it a piezoelectric pressure. So piezio means to put pressure on, and electric means it begins to create an electric pulse. So the crystals, there are tiny little crystals that are inside the pineal gland. They begin to expand and contract through the pressure. So if you can imagine them expanding and contracting, when that happens, they create a magnetic frequency. And that then around the head, as it's expanding and contracting, this piezoelectric pressure that's happening, the pineal gland, then the theory is, it becomes a transducer. And so if you want to understand what that means, think about how our cell phones are transducers, our TV is a transducer, the Wi-Fi system. There's all this information that we cannot see that's traveling all around us. And if we have a transducer, we can then hear and see that information. So the same is true of the pineal gland, in that when we get this pineal gland to expand and contract and to eject a tiny bit of the DMT, our awareness begins to change, and messages, things that we were not aware of, that are outside of our 3D world, then become available to us. That's the kind of alchemy that happens with Kundalini Yoga, is that suddenly the perspective of the person begins to change. They become aware of things that they were not aware of before. So the whole objective is to get to that point. And for each person, the revelations will be different. For each person, what they hear, what they see will be different. But this is the theory behind Kundalini Yoga and why it's important. So when this happens, this is really important. When this happens, the person practicing can have moments of bliss, because if you've ever done a psychedelic, you know that there are moments of bliss. So this bliss, to me, it reminded me so much of the mystics, the Christian mystics, the Sufis, all of your different mystical branches of religion who talk about having ecstatic experiences of ecstasy. Like, picture the statue of Saint Teresa of Avila. If you've never seen it, Google it after this video, and you'll see what an ecstatic experience is like. It's a feeling of bliss that just happens out of nowhere. And the person begins to change. So for example, with me, being out in nature, all of a sudden I became extremely sensitive to the different types of energy in different places of the world. I love to hike and be out in nature. And suddenly canyons gave me euphoric feelings, for example. Now each person is going to be different, but you'll begin to notice these changes inside of your psyche, inside of, just part of your experience. The experience is so broad because there's so many of us and we all experience things differently that it's hard to pinpoint specific examples. Each person is going to experience it differently. But typically, there's a feeling of bliss. So the whole point behind all of this is to get us ready for these mystical kinds of experiences, these alchemical types of experiences, as yogis. So again, this is why Kundalini Yoga is considered the crown of yoga, because there is no other yoga that goes directly to the point, that works on this in the way that it does, to give that sort of experience. And one of the ways that I think you'll be able to tell if someone has had an experience like this is you will see the fruits of the Spirit in them. And that comes from Christianity. It's something that Jesus talked about. And the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness. The list goes on and on. But when you start to see those things in people, then you'll know they've truly been changed by the experience of Kundalini. And they are on the path, the true path of a yogi. And they could be part of any particular religion, or they can be part of no religion whatsoever, and they can have these experiences. So that's the role that the pineal gland plays in Kundalini Yoga. I think it's fascinating. I hope you think it's fascinating. Leave some comments below about, if you've heard about this before, if you've ever had experiences like this before. I'd be curious to know. I'm curious about everything. So peace and love. Namaste. Until next time.